As you can see, I've got quite a few analog radios. In fact, I've probably got more handheld radios than I actually need. But of all of these radios, I'm actually missing one. I'm missing a digital capable radio. So I reached out to my friends at Radioddity and asked them, hey, what radios do you have on offer? And they said, why don't you check out our GD-88 digital mobile radio, DMR radio, which is what they sent me. Now, I'm completely new at DMR. I've never used a digital radio before. This is my first one. So I thought what I would do is just give an overview of this radio. Bit of a spoiler alert, I got very, very frustrated. But over time, and after getting through those initial hurdles, not too bad actually. And as we go along in this video, hopefully you, if you're interested in your first DMR radio or your next one, you'll be able to decide whether this is the one that's right for you. It is a DMR analog and also analog handheld. It's VHF and UHF, and it's pretty much packed with a whole bunch of features, and we're going to go through some of these today on the bench. It is currently $220 from Radioddity. There is a link in the description below, which is an affiliate link, which allows you to get $15 off this radio by using that link below. So if you're interested in picking one up by the end of this video. It's dual band, it's dual mode, it's dual standby, full duplex radio, so it will work on satellites as well. 2 different independent VFOs, so you can listen to 2 signals at the same time. You can also transmit while you're receiving another signal on the other side and listening too. There is also 300,000 DMR contacts available in this radio as well. So you can load it up worldwide with the DMR contacts that you need, so that you can load those in using the CPS software. And we'll go into the 2 CPS softwares that I used to program this up and the frustrations that I had. So here's a little diagram of the crossband repeat function. It's got a Baofeng here, which is an analog radio being transmitted up here to the GD-88, and then here to the GD-77, which is in digital mode. So it's got here UHF on the GD-77. You've got the crossband repeat, obviously, and then it's going back on VHF here to the Baofeng. So it is able to receive a signal on one frequency band, repeat it on the other, and it can crossband repeat from an analog band to a digital one, or from digital to analog the other way around. So that's a pretty neat little function that you don't normally get. This is the same frequency repeater function, which I'm still not clear on. Using one frequency for transmitting and receiving gives it full use of the DMR TDMA technique by using one time slot for receiving and transmitting the received signal on the same frequency. Okay. So I understand what this is now, I think. Dual repeat on 2 time slots. So you've got 2 time slots on DMR, and it can run a repeater across 2 time slots on one frequency. At least that's what I think this is what it's trying to say. So you can effectively create a mesh network for emergency communications. I haven't done that, and in actual fact, I'm still struggling to figure out how that actually works. The DMR network here in Australia, VK DMR, doesn't support GPS because you can send your GPS coordinates over the DMR network, but the VK DMR network doesn't support that. I haven't got my hotspot running yet, which is a future video, which will be connected to the Brandmeister network, and then I'll be able to send my GPS data. The GPS is also used for APRS as well, so if you're out and about and you want to beacon over the APRS packet network your location, then you can do that too. Now this thing does have a quite hefty battery. It is a 3000 milliamp hour battery. It's, well, when I say hefty, I mean in capacity wise, it's not really that large. The radio itself is not really that big when held in the hand, and the battery just snaps in quite nicely as well. So, it's quite comfortable. So it says 15 hours of continuous working time under analog and 23 hours under digital mode. I'm not quite sure of the specs of that. I need to look in a little bit more, because obviously it's going to use more power when you're transmitting, so I'm not sure what the TX-RX times are, so we can have a look there. It also comes with a desktop charger as well, so that's quite neat. You can also charge an additional battery in the back, or just your battery in the front. You don't need to plug in the radio to charge. There's also customizable keys, which you can program on the sides of the radio. The menu system in this radio, and I'll go into it, it took me a little bit of time to work it out. The audio's not too bad. That sounds pretty good. It's, I've got my own opinion of DMR audio, but for my first DMR audio and radio, it sounds okay. So enough with the specs. Let's go over to the workbench and we'll go over it in a little bit more detail, what it sounds like on the air. We'll do an output power test and some of the little quirks that I think are with this radio. So the absolute very first thing we need to do is this. Let's fire up the radio. Help me, I'm stuck in the radio. So obviously, yes, you can customize the boot screen. You can put a logo in here too. So what I've done is I've loaded a code plug in here. I used the Radioddity CPS software for loading my code plug in. I also use CP Editor, and I'm going to go into those two pieces of software a little bit later on and discuss the differences between the two and why you should use one over the other. There's also a great video on programming the code plug in this radio by Temporarily Offline by Steve. I would recommend that you go and watch that video because he explains really easily how the code plugs work in this radio and gives a great metaphor for using it. But for now, I've just programmed a couple in here that are local to my area, and I've got a couple of repeaters here, a couple of talk groups on a repeater or two here programmed in. And then on the bottom here, if we switch over, I've got my analog here at the bottom, a couple of my all-star node numbers, and also a couple of other repeaters, and obviously the call channel. You can also press the green button here, and you can select your your talk group or your analog group, depending on what VFO you actually want it on. So you can have digital on both, or you can have analog on both, whichever you want. But you can select that, and it is customizable. One thing that also threw me a little bit was you've got control and PTT. So the red button here controls which side of the which VFO you actually transmit on. I think you can also program one of these P1 or P2 keys as a second PTT button so that you don't have to keep doing that if you don't want to. The top button also is control. So you can see here I'm moving up and down and I'm controlling this VFO. If I press this button, then I'm here controlling the second VFO. So that was a little bit of a quirk that it took me a little bit of a time to work out. Now going into the menu, this is what initially caused a lot of my frustration. These menus are, I want to say that they're kind of like phone driven. I'm not used to these kind of menus. I'm still used to menus like on here going in and you get sort of radio terms. So you got radio, GPS, APRS here on the Kenwood. But here I've got contacts, message, call log, scan, zone and channel, local set, etc. So it kind of threw me a little bit, but now after playing with it for a week, I can understand what these are because obviously this is a DMR radio. It uses different terminology. So, and this is the terminology that they use in the Radioddity, and it kind of makes sense now. So I've loaded up my contacts here, and I've got a couple, I think I've got a couple loaded in here. Yeah, here we go. So some call signs loaded in the contacts list. Zone and channel, so that's where you can select what zone you want. So I've created two zones, a talk group zone and an analog zone. And incidentally too, Steve goes into this information in his video, so definitely check it out and there'll be a link below for that. Local set, so this is where a lot of the sort of radio-y menus would be. So keypad lock backlight, I can change the backlight brightness and switch it on and off. The LEDs, the display mode, so I can have at the moment, I can have it as a single mode, so rather than a dual mode, I've now got single mode when I can switch between the talk groups or the analog groups that way. I can display the channel name or the channel name plus the frequency, so I've just changed that there, and now I've got the ability to, there it's showing me frequency and I think channel names up here. It might not show it to me unless it's in single mode because of the amount of room that it needs. Yeah, there we go. Well, it's got TXRX. For some reason, it doesn't have the torque group names now shown. And again, this is one of the funny little quirks. You kind of need to sort of mess around to get it customized to how you want it. And it may not even be customizable. So yeah, so CHN, I thought that would be channel name, but it's got channel name plus name, and then you've got channel plus frequency. But anyway, they're the display modes. Parameters is also another radio-y mode. So you've got a timeout timer. I've got it set for 3 minutes. Power, you can adjust low or high power, although that is set by default in the code plug, depending on your particular channel that you've programmed in. But once I programmed this up using the code plug software, I didn't really need to go into any of these menus. So whilst it was frustrating at first, because I was trying to drive the radio using the inbuilt menus, once the code plug was written, then I didn't really have to go in here that often. I kind of go in here maybe to just like adjust the output power, and I could probably program one of these keys to do that. But yeah, it was kind of frustrating. But after a little bit of playing around, it just become relatively simple to use, and I didn't really have to go in here once it was set and forget. Just in here, the what is it? The appendix menu. So you've got GPS, so you can turn your GPS on or off. It's got FM radio. One thing with this radio, and it is a frustration, and I've read a lot of people that have had frustrating issues with it, and it should be fixed in a firmware update if Radioddity can do it, is the volume knob here on the top. When you adjust the volume, it's not really that sensitive. So look, I've just adjusted the volume and it takes a little bit of time, so it's not really that responsive. The other thing is that in the minimum volume, that's the minimum volume on FM radio, which is not too bad, but it's different compared to when you're actually in a QSO on DMR or analog. The minimum volume is too loud, and you can't turn it down anymore because it's not like an analog pot or anything. It's like a digital pot, and you can't turn it all the way down, which is rather frustrating. And there's also the APRS menu. I wouldn't go in here into the APRS menu and set up everything in here. I'd use the software because there are so many different menus in here. I just would get lost. There is also a GPS beacon. I'm not sure if this is smart beaconing or not. I haven't looked deep enough into the APRS. That's probably going to warrant a different video. Another frustrating issue that I had with this radio was that I needed to update to the latest firmware for DMR to work. DMR did not work on the VK DMR server here in Australia unless I was running the latest firmware, and I think it had something to do with the receive groups. Again, Steve goes into that in his video, so have a look at that. But if you're having problems and you got this radio and it doesn't work on DMR, it might be just a quirk with the VK DMR server, and it might just work fine on Brandmeister, but I had issues with getting it running, so I updated to the latest firmware. You can also go in here and edit the channel. This is where you would go in and manually do it. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, you could, if you're running this in VFO mode and you hadn't programmed a torque group and you just wanted to go in here and set up something real quick, yes, I guess you could. But it's gonna frustrate you. So like here, like I've just selected that, and I don't even get a drop down menu. I've just got to select what's going on. Looks like here's that crossband functionality. I don't actually see analog to analog in there, but anyway, it's a little bit of a pain. So that's the menus. My setup is I'm just going to transmit on analog here on my 2 meter call frequency, which is 146,500. And we can see the TX power there. So high power we're getting out 5.3 watts, which is what I would expect. VK7HH testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hello. So you can see there that the FM deviation is kind of getting up to about 4.5 kilohertz, which is probably what I would expect on analog. One thing I've noticed on digital is it does sound a little bit quiet, and someone actually said to me that I sounded a little bit quiet. I've got a video here of me on the other end of a conversation the other day.
Listening to the digitised audio break up a little bit, so that's pretty funny. All right, no worries at all. Talk to you later on.
So that gives you an idea of what the audio sounds like coming out of the radio on digital. On analog, it's not too bad though, especially compared to some cheaper radios. But for this radio, it's what I would expect. And low power is about 1.7 watts. Back to high power, and let's do a test on UHF. So high power yields about 5.8 watts, 5.7, so same as the VHF. And low power is about 1.9 watts. Let's have a look on the spectrum analyzer now. So I've got a reference level of 38 dBm, so about the top there should be, yep, the transmission. So there we go, 146,500, we got 37.28 dBm, which is about the power that we measured. So let's go and have a look at the second harmonic and see how clean it is, or how dirty it is, depending on what we find. Okay, so we've got 293 megs, and we're down at minus 15, minus 16. 439.5, we transmit, and I don't even see anything on the meter. Let's turn down the scale here a little bit. Okay, with our reference level now, we're down to 20 dB, so we've adjusted that a little bit more, and we're at minus 26 dB. So we're right down there, which is good. So looking now at 586, and again, I don't see anything at all. Now let's go back to the fundamental frequency, and what we'll do is we'll just open up our span a little bit. Actually, let's just go to 200 megahertz so that we get a nice span. We'll put our span up to 200 megs. So we're looking from 100 megahertz at this end, and we're looking at 300 megahertz this end, just to see if it's clean or if it's dirty, if there's any other spurs. So we can see there that there's one which is the fundamental on the left, and you've got the second harmonic on the right, so you can see that that's a fair way down. Each one of those divisions is about 10 dB, so you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, almost 50 dB down. 50, a little bit more than 50 dB down. Here's another issue that I had when I set up as well for the first time. I didn't really understand DMR that much, and when I was transmitting, I got this BS failed error message, which means base station failed. The BS failed meant that basically you weren't in range of the repeater, or you had the wrong frequency programmed in, or something like that. We've got a multi-mode repeater which does D-Star, Yaesu System Fusion, and also DMR. And it was actually being used in another mode at the time. So when I transmitted, I kept getting that BS failed, and it really frustrated me a little bit. It wasn't the fault of the radio, it was just the fact that I didn't realize that at the time as a beginner. So I mentioned about the lowish kind of audio on digital. Let's do a test first on analog, and then we'll do a test on digital. So I've got my All-Star Link node. I'm gonna dial up the Parrot node, which is node 5553. And then we'll see what it sounds like. Now this node actually tells you if your audio is actually loud enough, and it will also repeat back your audio too. So let's do that. VK7HH testing 1, 2, 3.
Audio level is pretty good.
VK7HH testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so that said the audio level is pretty good, and I've got the level set at half scale here on the radio. So that sounded pretty good to me. So let's just disconnect that node now, and we'll do a digital test. VK7 Hotel Hotel, VK7HH testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
VK7 Hotel Hotel, VK7HH testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Let's demonstrate here the full duplex operation of this radio, which is a great function if you want to be using this for satellite. So we've got the top frequency here, this is my All-Star node, and the bottom here we've got a 2-meter repeater on ready to transmit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to key up this node while I'm listening to it. I'm going to transmit on 2 meters.
Good morning. The time is 11:54.
So you can see there, I could hear this signal while I was also transmitting here. So if we're transmitting on one side of the radio, then we can go through, say, a satellite, and we can be receiving on the other side. So it does full duplex, which is really, really cool. Here's an example of the crossband repeat function. So I've just got analog to analog. I've got a 2-meter simplex frequency here in the top, and I've got my All-Star Link node here on the bottom. So I've just gone into the menus, and again, it takes a little bit of time to work out what all of these mean, but if you go into AB repeat, you turn AB repeat on, and you select your mode. I've just selected transceive, I think RxTX on both. and then set them up so that I've got 2 meters in the top, 70 centimeters at the bottom. Now, if I actually key my node, and I'm not going to key it with the radio or anything, I'm just going to key it here, you'll see that it'll come out here from UHF. It's transmitting on UHF. This radio will receive it from my node on UHF, and then what it will do is it will transmit it out on 2 meters. So let's just go ahead and do that. So receiving, transmitting, and transmitting on 2 meters. So there's a basic analog crossband repeat. Now, not only that, we can select down the bottom here a digital. So I've got here on the top analog, 2 meters, 146, 500. And at the bottom here, I've got my DMR talk groups. A VK7HH testing crossband parrot mode talk group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, VK7HH.
VK7HH
That's better.
Crossband parrot mode talk group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 VK7HH.
That sounded actually pretty good for a crossband test from analog to digital and from digital back to analog. So onto the code plug software. This is the version from Radioddity, and you can go through here and read from your radio. It's actually relatively straightforward. You just need to plug in the programming cable that comes with the radio, load the driver from Radioddity, and just read from the radio, and you can change all of these functions. This software I initially started out with, but it was a little bit convoluted and a bit confusing for me. I had to keep switching between all of these different menus, and I had to go from, say, scrolling along from here to select my talk groups under contacts and the receive group here, which was a little bit frustrating. So I would much recommend to download this CP editor. This is by David MM7DBT, and it supports the GD-88. This software is much, much easier to utilize. You can update the firmware using it. You can also do the startup logo, as you saw earlier. You can change that. You can also write the DMR database per country to it. So, and the menu system is much more easier to use. So what are my first impressions of DMR? Well, I've kind of had a bit of a, I'm used to analog, but it is rather cool that I can just dial up a talk group and I can talk pretty much across the whole of Australia or across the world really, really easily by just programming that in and connecting to my hotspot or to my repeater. That is quite a benefit. The audio quality is still one of the bugbears of DMR that I have, but that's what you get with digital radio. The GD-88 for this particular radio, when I first got it, it was really, really frustrating and hard to use. And then when I started playing with it over about a week or so, and I got my code plug installed, and I got a little bit of help from some other people as well, installed the new firmware, it actually become rather easy to operate. Some of the more advanced features are sometimes a little bit more buried down into the menus, and you kind of have to read the manual very carefully to understand how they actually work. For instance, the crossband repeat function that I demonstrated earlier, that probably took about a good 5 or 10 minutes of mucking around to try and figure out what was going on. Now that I've done it once, I actually know how relatively simple it is and how easy it is to set up. For DMR, for a starter handheld, it's a well-built radio. It feels pretty good in the hand. It feels pretty robust. It does the job. So, I don't really have that many complaints about it. If you're a complete beginner to DMR like I am and you want to learn more about it and how the technology actually works, then there is a video that I've done on it right here which goes through the basics.